Good afternoon. My name is Andrea. Welcome to Kairos. We're finishing up, continuing this series, The Prophet in You. We are going to explore an interesting topic today. Initially, when this topic was given to me, it was to look at the relationship between Greek philosophy and Bible prophecy. But in my research and in preparing for this teaching, I've come to find out it should really be called Greek culture and Bible prophecy, because there are other elements at work in there other than just Greek philosophy. We're going to be going several different places in the Bible, so if you're watching this online and you would like to follow along, if you need a minute to get a Bible, or if you have a phone and you want to pull out your Bible app, I'll allow you a few minutes to do that. I just want to take a few minutes to just kind of talk about Greek culture. Greek culture has always fascinated me. It's such an interesting history. It's after several thousand years, it's still vibrant and it's still rich. It's something that is I think has been the delight and the daydream for much of Western culture, but I think to some extent it's also been part of the destruction too, because there are certain elements at play in Greek culture that are very destructive, especially from a Judeo-Christian perspective. But I do love learning about Greek literature, Greek art, Greek architecture. Greek philosophy still impacts a lot of how we think, how we process things. Instead of only today we may call it atheism or agnosticism, whereas back in Greece they would never say I'm an atheist or an agnostic, but they might say I'm a skeptic, or I'm an Epicurean, or I'm a cynic. And it's funny how we've stamped our little name for it. They had their name for it, and it's basically the same thing. Which just proves what Solomon said in Ecclesiastes. There's nothing new under the sun. So, if you have your Bibles and would like to follow along, we're going to begin in Acts 17. We're going to look at verses 16 through 34. We're going to look at Paul when he preached on Mars Hill in Athens. Mars Hill is obviously the Latin for that. The Greek for that hill is Areopagus, which means the hill of Ares, or Mars. Ares was the Greek god of war. He was the Greek god of masculinity, of bloodshed, of violence. Most of the other Greek gods, the gods that lived on Mount Olympus, didn't like him much, except for Aphrodite. They were lovers, even though she was married to Ares' half-brother, Hephaestus, one of the gods. They are the parents of the god Eros in Greek, but his Latin name, you're more familiar with it, is Cupid. His symbols, all of the Greek gods had multiple symbols, were the boar, the serpent, the dog, the vulture, spear, and shield. And the hill that we're talking about is at the base of the Acropolis in Athens. So on top of the Acropolis proper, you have the Parthenon, you have the Agora, the open marketplace, and then towards the bottom is where you have the hill, the Mars Hill. So, let's begin. I'm reading out of the Amplified, and I'll also be reading out of the Berean Standard Bible as well a little bit later. But I'm going to stick to the Amplified for the most part. Acts 17, beginning verse 16. Now while Paul was waiting for them at Athens, Silas and Timothy, his spirit was greatly angered when he saw that the city was full of idols. So he had discussions in the synagogue with the Jews and the God-fearing Gentiles, and in the marketplace day after day with any who happened to be there. And some of the Epicurean and Stoic philosophers, we'll get to that in a few minutes, began to engage in conversation with him. And some said, "What could this babbler with this eclectic scrap heap learning have in mind to say?" Others said, "He seems to be a proclaimer of strange deities, because he was preaching the good news about Jesus and the resurrection." They took him and brought him to the Areopagus, hill of Ares, the Greek god of war, saying, "May we know what this strange new teaching is which you are proclaiming? For you are bringing some startling and strange things to our ears. So we want to know what they mean." Now all the Athenians and the foreigners visiting there used to spend their leisure time in nothing other than telling or hearing something new. That's another thing about the Greeks. They were always curious, and they had such almost a, dare I say this, rabid curiosity. They couldn't get enough of knowing things, learning things, understanding how things worked. That was their genius, and that was their flaw. So Paul, standing in the center of the Areopagus, or Mars Hill, said, "Men of Athens, I observe with every turn I make throughout the city that you are very religious and devout in all respects. Now as I was going along and carefully looking at your objects of worship, I came to an altar with this inscription, 'To an unknown God.' Therefore, what you already worship as unknown, this I proclaim to you. The God who created the world and everything in it, since he is Lord of heaven and earth, does not dwell in temples made with hands, nor is he served by human hands as though he needed anything, because it is he who gives to all people life and breath and all things. And he made from one man every nation of mankind to live on the face of the earth, having determined their appointed times and the boundaries of their lands and their territories. This was so that they would seek God, if perhaps they might grasp for him and find him, though he is not far from each one of us. For in him we live and move and exist. That is, in him we actually have our being. As even some of your own poets have said, for we also are his children. So then, being God's children, we should not think that the divine nature of deity is like gold or silver or stone, an image formed by the art and imagination or skill of man. And that's one thing the Greeks excelled at. Therefore, God overlooked and disregarded the former ages of ignorance, but now he commands all people everywhere to repent. That is, to change their old way of thinking, to regret their past sins, and to seek God's purpose for their lives, because he has set a day when he will judge the inhabited world in righteousness by a man whom he has appointed and destined for that task. And he has provided credible proof to everyone by raising him from the dead. Now, when they heard the term resurrection from the dead, some mocked and sneered, but others said, we will hear from you again about this matter. So Paul left them, but some men joined him and believed. Among them were Dionysius, a judge of the council of Areopagus, and a woman named Damaris, and others with him. So what we're going to talk about, the Greek aspect of this, we're going to go back to the beginning. When the original conversation begins, you have these Epicurean and Stoic philosophers engaging Paul. And Paul was very astute. I mean, and you have to understand, the Greeks are very arrogant about a lot of things. They think anybody that's not Greek, that isn't them, is a babbler and is stupid. They assume that about everyone and everything. Paul, I submit to you, I think Paul was probably the most intellectual and the smartest man there. He knew more than most of them would ever know in one lifetime. So, and because he was Paul, we know that when he was younger, he was more than likely educated at the academy, the Greek school in Tarsus, which was one of the Ivy League institutions in the ancient world in terms of a Greek education. The three best places in the Mediterranean world to get a really, really excellent Greek education were Athens, Alexandria, and Tarsus. So Paul was definitely prepared and able to speak to them. So we're going to talk just a little bit. I don't want to get too in-depth in this because my research, you could spend a lifetime studying Greek and Greek philosophy and not understand all of it. But I just want to hit the real nuts and bolts of these things. So we'll talk first about Epicureanism. Sorry. It was founded in 307 BC based on the teachers of a Greek philosopher, Epicurus. Now, it's often a mistaken assumption that Epicurus coined the phrase, "Let us eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die." That's technically not true. He never coined that. He never said that. The first occurrence of that to happen is in the Bible, actually in Isaiah 22:13. And the Epicureans are often painted with a brush that they were very hedonistic. And it's possible they did, as the centuries waned on, they probably could have become more hedonistic. But Epicureanism, at its core, from a philosophical standpoint, was not based on eating, drinking, having sex, doing all the things that you associate with that. Epicurus, when he came to Athens, built a garden in Athens and wanted to achieve contentment using his philosophy. He wanted it to be in this beautiful area. And his community that he built was unique. Normally, the philosophical schools, usually it was mostly men, but Epicurus was open to both men and women. It was co-ed. That could be a problem. The Epicurean life was very plain. Participants drank mostly water, would eat barley bread, maybe with a small portion of wine, and on rare occasions have some cheese. There was no community property. The emphasis was raised around a life built on friendship and freedom from anxiety. They did that by believing that all you have is here and now. They disregarded the gods. They did not believe in the gods. They believed in the gods, but they believed that the gods were on Mount Olympus, man's down here, the gods don't care. So there is no consciousness of death. There is no afterlife in the Epicurean mindset. So all you have is here and now. And the best thing you can do is to live a life around virtue. Now, most of the philosophical schools and the philosophers believed in virtue. And they sought a way of life built around virtue by seeking peace in simple things like nature, limiting their possessions, emphasizing personal character, seeking pleasure for the mind over sensual pleasure, and by being flexible and valuing friendship. Now, like I said, I didn't delve too deep into how that evolved over the centuries. It could have evolved into a hedonistic eat, drink, be merry way of life eventually, but at its core, that's what it was. Then you have the Stoics, and that was found in the ancient Agora of Athens by Zeno of Citium around 300 BCE. To the Stoics, virtue is the only good for human beings. They believed that external things like health, wealth, and pleasure aren't really good or bad, but they do have value for virtue to act upon. They believed in a eudaimonia, which is a well-lived and flourishing life in Greek. To achieve that, they believed in practicing certain virtues every single day: courage, temperance, and living in accord with nature. Virtue and nature, that's a constant thing throughout the philosophical schools, the other philosophical schools, and the philosophers. The best indication, according to a Stoic, of an individual's philosophy was not what they said, but how they behaved. They also believed, this is where you get into Stoic, when we think of a Stoic, developing self-control and fortitude, as a means of overcoming destructive emotions. They were interesting too. Their theological ideas were very fatalistic, but they were also pantheistic too, meaning that God was in everything, because they believed that God is the totality of the universe. Everything in the universe is God to some degree. How far they took that, I don't know, because I didn't have the time to go into that. I mean, you could take this topic and it could really be, this could be a dissertation, a PhD dissertation, it really could, if you wanted to go that deep. So, but the Stoics really didn't care for the Epicureans, and the Epicureans really didn't care for the Stoics. So the fact that it opens up and you've got these two, I think that's interesting, engaging in conversation. It says engaging in conversation. I would say probably arguing, heated debate, that's probably closer to it.
Yeah.
But that's interesting. I like this. I like the fact, I think for Paul, given the fact that he was educated, he did have that Greek education, I think there was probably a little part of him that was thrilled that he got to stand in Athens, sort of the epitome of Greek culture and Greek learning, and even quotes Greek poetry. He got to share Jesus. I also like the fact that he wasn't so overtaken with delight at being in Greece that he wasn't disturbed. I mean, I think I like the way it opens. It says that he was really disturbed by all the idols and all of this, and I can't help but wonder if maybe, he looked at them and he kind of felt maybe the way Jesus did when Jesus looked on the multitudes and he had compassion for them. I think it's possible he had a lot of compassion and really felt for these people, because they were the intellectuals. These were not stupid people. These were intellectuals. That's part of the reason why they sneered at him, because he's from Tarsus, which is okay, but it's not them. So, that's where we get the Greek philosophical schools. There are other philosophical schools too. I'm not going to touch on those because we don't have the time. We're going to go next and see Greek mythology. And yes, Greek mythology is in the Bible for a little moment. We're going to go to Acts 14, verses 8 to 18. Now this is when Paul and Barnabas they go to Iconium, they're going to Derbe, and but before they go to Derbe and some of those other places, they go to Lystra. So this is where we're going to encounter this. Acts 14, verses 8 through 18. Now at Lystra, a man sat who was unable to use his feet, for he was crippled from birth and had never walked. This man was listening to Paul as he spoke, and Paul looked intently at him and saw that he had faith to be healed. And with a loud voice, Paul said, "Stand upon your feet." And he jumped up and began to walk. And the crowds, when they saw what Paul had done, raised their voices, shouting in the Lycaonian language, "The gods have come down to us in human form." They began calling Barnabas Zeus, king of the gods, and Paul Hermes, the messenger of the Greek gods, since he took the lead in speaking. The priest of Zeus, whose temple was at the entrance of the city, brought bulls and garlands to the city gates and wanted to offer sacrifices with the crowds. But when the apostles, Barnabas and Paul, heard about it, they tore their robes and rushed out into the crowd shouting, "Men, why are you doing these things? We too are only men of the same nature as you, bringing the good news to you, so that you turn from these useless and meaningless things to the living God, who made the heaven and the earth and the sea and everything that is in them. In generations past, he permitted all the nations to go their own way. Yet he did not leave himself without some witness, as evidence of himself, in that he kept constantly doing good things and showing you kindness and giving you rains from heaven and productive seasons, filling your hearts with food and happiness. Even saying these words with difficulty, they prevented the people from offering sacrifices to them." Now this is it's sad and it's kind of funny too. I think it's funny that they perform miracles, and immediately these people want to start worshiping him as Zeus and Hermes. That's interesting. So, and it's interesting because Zeus, also known by his Roman name Jupiter, was the king of the gods. He was the ruler of the gods on Mount Olympus and all of the other Greek gods in the pantheon. He was also god of the sky, lightning, thunder, law, order, and justice. His symbols were the thunderbolt, eagle, oak tree, bull. We see that in scripture, the bull. I've seen other English translations where they translate that oxen, and when I saw that, I was very disturbed by that. I was like, it's not an oxen, it's a bull. There's a difference. These were sacred bulls. These bulls never pulled anything in their life except meal to meal. That's probably the only thing they pulled, was just, having to strain a little bit to get their food. Scepter and scales. He was married to his full sister, another Greek goddess, Hera. His favorite pastime was having numerous affairs with many different women, goddesses, lesser goddesses, mortal women, you name it. That was what he liked. Then you have Hermes, also called Mercury in Latin, the messenger of the gods. Now, he's interesting. He was not just the messenger of the gods, he was also god of travel, commerce, communication, which is why they assume that, because he was speaking. Paul was the one that was speaking. This is where it's a little insulting if you think about it. He was also the god of borders, eloquence, diplomacy, games, thieves, and merchants. So when they were calling him Hermes, it was kind of a backhanded compliment, I think. Anyway, he was the son of Zeus. He never marries, but does have several affairs in the pantheon and fathers several children. His symbols are interesting because two of his symbols are still very prominent in our culture today. The caduceus, that's the staff. Everybody's seen that, the staff with the two serpents entwined around it, especially in medicine. We still have that today. Also, winged sandals and a cap. Who remembers FTD, that florist company that had the little golden sandals? That's where that comes from, with the wings on it. His symbols, the stork and the tortoise. He supposedly used, according to Greek mythology, used a tortoise shell to invent the musical instrument known as the lyre. So those are the Greek gods. But I think that's kind of funny. They think Barnabas, they're paying such a high compliment almost to Barnabas, to the Greek mind. Because he's Zeus. He's the most powerful. But they're kind of paying a compliment to Paul too, because he was the messenger god, but he's also the god of thieves. I think that's kind of funny. But that shows, how these people were so hungry for God, for a spiritual presence in their lives. They were surrounded by gods, and they were surrounded by religion. And make no mistake about it, even though most of the philosophers and the Greek intellectuals and the philosophical schools didn't put a lot of stock in the gods, religion in Greek culture was part of the structure of society. So, even if they didn't believe in it, they might still go to ceremonies. They might still participate in certain things to show it was kind of like their civic duty. You know what I mean? So, these people are hungry though. They're hungry for God. They're hungry for somebody to be involved in their lives. And I think it's fascinating to see the difference between their attitude, these people in this little outpost in Asia Minor, versus the intellectual crew in Athens. They're like, well, what is this you believe? And why do you believe it? And, I don't know about that, versus these people, you're Zeus, you're Hermes, come on, let's sacrifice. This is awesome, you're here. We can see you. It's really, it's funny, but if you think about it, it's really sad too. It shows this spiritual desperation of these people. They were so desperate. And isn't that the kind of the way it is in America now too? I mean, we are surrounded by religion. America does not want for religion. But make no mistake about it. What America needs is not more religion, but we need spirituality. And we need a spirituality that is based and rooted and grounded in the Bible, in Jesus, in God. That's what we need. We don't need more religion. We don't need more ceremonies. We don't need more of this or more of that. We just need to kind of take all of that away, strip all of that away, and just get back to the basics. And just come to the Word and come to spending time worshiping as believers. And when we leave our corporate worship as the body and the bride of Christ, then we go out and we let our lives preach what we've learned, what God has imparted to us when we've been alone with Him. And then when our lives preach, hopefully our mouths agree with what our lives say. It shouldn't be the mouth speaks and the life agrees. I think it should be life speaks, then mouth agrees. Because if you're not walking in what you believe, who's going to believe what you say to begin with? I won't. So,
Andrea?
Yes.
Paul said his message didn't come just with words.
That's right.
It came with power.
That's right.
You can't argue. You could argue with words.
Right.
But it's hard to argue with a miracle.
It's true. You're right about that. That is very true. So, those are the two scriptures that initially, when I was approached to do this study, Myra came to me with. But the Lord opened some things to me that I also want to share with you. We're also going to get into an actual Greek philosopher who I believe Paul is referencing in a very directly in a very indirect way. We're going to go to Romans 10:4 first. Romans 10:4. For Christ is the end of the law. It leads to Him. I love how the Amplified, this is one of the reasons why I'm using the Amplified. I love this because I feel like the Amplified, the editors of the Amplified Bible, I think they kind of understood this. For Christ is the end of the law. It leads to Him, and its purpose is fulfilled in Him. Don't miss that. That's important. For granting righteousness to everyone who believes in Him as Savior. In Greek, the word that's used there for end is telos. Telos has several different meanings. It can mean the end. It can mean like an end when you put an end to something, meaning it's finished, it's completed. It can also mean an end that leads to a greater purpose, which is what this is saying. It's not for Christ. Christ isn't the end of the law, meaning the law didn't cease to be with His presence. And I mean, Jesus Himself even said that early on in His ministry. When people asked Him, have you come to fulfill the law, or have you come to destroy the law? I forget how He words it, but it's destroy the law. Basically, are you doing away with the law? And Jesus said, think not I've come to destroy the law, but I've come to fulfill the law. He didn't come to end the law, meaning the law was just done and over with to some extent. It still has value. It still has a purpose. It's just His presence is the fulfillment of the law. He is what gives the law purpose in the first place. That's Romans 10:4. Okay, now we're going to go to 1 Corinthians 12, verses 12 to 31. Let me get there. Just a minute to get there. I don't think I marked this. That's just great. But I'm getting there. 1 Corinthians 12, verses 12 to 31. The Lord gave me this. This is something, the Lord put this passage on my mind when I was doing research on a particular Greek philosopher that we're going to talk about in just a minute. This is a very familiar passage to those of us who have been in the church for most of our lives. We've heard, all of us have probably heard at least minimum one sermon on this, and probably multitudes more on that. 1 Corinthians chapter 12, beginning verse 12. For just as the body is one and yet has many parts. Well, wait a minute. This is where I'm going to deviate a little bit, because the Amplified, you could go on and on and on and on with the Amplified. And I'm trying to make this meaningful yet not be long-winded. Okay, I'm going to read out of the King James for this one. For as the body is one, and hath many members, and all the members of that one body, being many, are one body, so also is Christ. For by one Spirit are we all baptized, into one body, whether we be Jews or Gentiles, whether we be bond or free, and have been all made to drink into one Spirit. For the body is not one member, but many. So each member of the body has its own, each serves its own particular function. It's also serving the overall function of the body too. Keep that in your mind. That's going to be important. If the foot shall say, because I am not the hand, I am not of the body, is it therefore not of the body? And if the ear shall say, because I am not of the eye, I am not of the body, is it therefore not of the body? If the whole body were an eye, where were the hearing? If the whole were hearing, where were the smelling? But now God hath set the members, every one of them, in the body as it hath pleased him. And if we are all one member, where were the body? But now are they many members, yet but one body. And the eye cannot say unto the hand, I have no need of thee. Nor again the head to the feet, I have no need of you. Nay, much more, those members of the body which seem to be more feeble are necessary. And those members of the body which we think to be less honorable, upon these we bestow more abundant honor. And our uncomely parts have more abundant comeliness. Okay, I'm going to stop there, because you can go on and on and on. So, before I come back and I explain this, I want to briefly talk about this Greek philosopher. Now, he is one of the big three. He's, in terms of Greek, the philosophers, he's the most recent of the three. We're talking about Aristotle. The other two are Socrates and Plato, and I'm really not going to hit on them because we don't have time. Plus, Aristotle is my favorite. I think Aristotle's kind of cool. Aristotle lived from 384 to 322 BC. He was born in a place called Stagira, which is in northern Greece. Interesting, I did not know this when I was